Hi, everyone. Welcome to our conversation about DV and the LGBTQ plus community for Pride Month this June. This is a continuation of our conversation from Transgender Awareness Month back in November. So if you already haven't seen that conversation after today's, definitely check that out. We have a lot of information in there as well. So my name is Maddie Hahn from JBWS.
And I'm Stephanie Klotz, also from JBWS, and we are so very excited to have our community partners from EDGE here with us, Kelly Martins and Nicholas Lepper. So Kelly, why don't you introduce yourself quickly to our audience?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie and Maddie. So my name is Kelly. My pronouns are she and her. I am with EDGE New Jersey. I am their social services manager. And some vulnerability with you all. I just would like to share that I am a survivor of domestic violence. I'm very proud to be able to be here with you all today.
Hi, my name is Nicholas. I go by he, him, his pronouns, and I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for EDGE New Jersey. And I am so honored and appreciative to have been invited to this space today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. So, Kelly, I wanted to start with you. I know you mentioned that you're a survivor, and one of the most important experiences and learning that can ever happen for people hearing about DV is to hear directly from a survivor. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing that. I was wondering if you might be able to share with us when you first noticed abuse in your relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to start by saying, as a survivor, being able to share my truth is also very therapeutic and healing. So I want to thank you both for being able to create this space for other individuals who'll be watching. So as I reflect back at my growth and journey with domestic violence, I found that the trend actually started about those who I was attracting. They typically were people who needed help themselves, whether they experienced a hardship of trauma growing up in their childhood or were quote unquote broken. There was an immediate desire for me to protect them. Naturally, as an empathic person by trade and nature, as a social worker, I found that I was able to oversee these red flags and signs of abuse in front of me while it was happening. Instead, I found myself justifying the toxic behavior that was in front of me as a result of the trauma that they experienced. And so I took on more of a caregiver and fixing role rather than the role of myself as the victim. Instead, through time, I found that those elements were actually, in fact, domestic violence, but I was only able to notice that when I was on the outside looking in on my experience. So 3 years ago, I began dating a woman in New York City who on the surface saw me for who I was, right? And that's, of course, in the beginning of dating someone, you want the individual to see you for who you are. And through time, I realized that, in fact, they weren't seeing me for who I was and was pointing out the things that were my insecurities, the things that were my self-esteem as the things that they saw rather than the good that I brought. And so through time, I found that throughout our relationship, what held us together was when we drank together. And although I never developed a drinking problem myself, I did notice that my former partner actually did develop a drinking problem, and they would get angry and jealous and aggressive. And although most of the time of the relationship, it wasn't physical, I recognize now that there was a tremendous amount of mental and emotional abuse that contributed to the nature of our relationship. Her behavior began to cause me to doubt her intentions and suspect that she was unfaithful. And they always say they should follow your gut and that your gut is always truthful. And through time, although this goes against my character, I actually went through her phone and confronted her regarding this unfaithful fear that I had early on in our relationship. And ironically enough, instead of taking ownership of that, she blamed me for doing that in the first place. And so because of my sympathetic and empathetic nature, I understood where she was coming from, and I blamed myself as causing that as a thing to happen. The second incident, and for me, the most traumatic display of domestic violence happened when we took a trip to Thailand in October 2019. This trip was booked in hopes that getting away would actually solve the relationship and some of the issues, so almost removing yourself from the norm and being able to just be together. It actually wasn't the case. So in the span of the 10 days that we were together, it was clear that the change of scenery wasn't going to fix this relationship. She got aggressive countless times with me, threw her drink at me when we were in public. And it was just very clear that I wasn't the problem, and that I was with someone who was very protective and jealous at anything and anyone who was around me. And so the incident that occurred was one of the many times that we were out drinking. We got back to the hotel room and she was unable to like hold her bladder until we got to the room. So it was very embarrassing, but she went like right outside the hotel and left her phone out in public. So when we got back to the room and I helped her get in there, she left her phone. And so I went back to go get it. And when I went back to go get it, I was curious. And so I did what I did in the beginning of a relationship, which is I went through her phone. So I had uninterrupted a 5-minute walk. And for me, I think I was just seeking validation, like proving that although I was very hesitant and knew that the relationship wasn't going anywhere, I just wanted to prove to myself that like there was no more lying, there was no more unfaithfulness. And so I was surprised, or I should say not surprised, that I went back and I found exactly what my gut was telling me, was that this person wasn't being faithful. And when I look back at it now, and I believe many survivors look back at the situation and are able to say, hey, I shouldn't have done this or I shouldn't have done that. But when I entered the room and I called my ex-girlfriend out for what I saw, she immediately got defensive and pinned me to the ground and started just like really hurting me and beating me. And that was the first time in my life I actually felt as though I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. And so I ran to the balcony. We were on the 3rd floor and I said, okay, well, what's worse? Being hurt or breaking a leg? And so I contemplated, like, if I jump off of this, I might break a leg, but I'll be able to escape the scenario. And so I cried for help. No one was able to kind of help me because it was the middle of the night. And so I left the room. I was able to leave the room, defend myself, but I left the room with no belongings. So no passport, no shoes, no sense of identity, just 10% on my phone. And so I ran out and I thought, okay, what am I going to do in the middle of nowhere in a country that I didn't speak the native language? So I just slept in the lobby until the next morning when I knew that they were going to wake up as a different person. One of the things that I've learned through my work of healing is that sometimes substances distort one's mind. And so I knew that in the morning, they weren't going to recall or not be in that same mindset. And so I was able to go back, grab my belongings, and the start of healing began after that experience. And so I share that with you all as a piece of vulnerability, that I am in the field of social work and I am working at a Pride Center, and I was not exempt from domestic violence, although I myself might have been aware of what is commonly seen as an experience. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing your story. I think it is so powerful for our audience to hear someone's personal experience. I think that makes it more real and for us to understand the importance of having this conversation today. One of the things that really stood out for me while listening to you share was how challenging, even if we know the warning signs, right? Even if we have this knowledge, how challenging it can really be to identify that when it's happening in our own relationship, when we have that inside angle. That really can just be so hard. And I think your story really spoke to that. When did you realize that you needed help and resources?
it took me a while to realize that I needed help because as a social worker, the field and the work that I'm around is helpful, right? So my colleagues are supportive. I was taught in school about different counseling modalities. And so I felt as though I didn't need the help because I knew the answers. But knowing the answers also didn't allow me to see the signs when I was put into a situation of domestic violence. And so, although I can understand why members of the LGBTQ community might not be able to seek services due to how they identify or what their gender identity is, for me, I was very prideful because I worked at a Pride Center and because I had, or I hold a position of being, seen as like knowing all the answers and connecting people to services. And then I thought, well, oh no, like now I need this service, but where do you go when you yourself would be going to the Pride Center that is providing those services, right? And so I'm very appreciative that the colleagues that I call my coworkers and also my family were able to create an environment for me which kind of protected me. And so I didn't necessarily seek counseling services from Edge, New Jersey, but I was able to kind of be vulnerable and be able to process and heal through the experiences that my clients were presenting, but then also know that I had this non-judgmental support from my team, that if I wasn't in a headspace that was clear that day, that I was okay to be there.
Thanks for sharing that, Kelly. I think it's so important that that's such a parallel to anyone's experience, right? That survivors that have support are the ones that are successful in navigating safely through relationships and into a place where they are able to get free from abuse. And so I definitely agree. We often see that survivors from the LGBTQ community might fear that they will be ostracized from that community, perhaps if their partner is a part of the same community and they maybe met their friends through that person, or being turned away because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity is a real fear for a lot of people. And so your story is so reflective of what every survivor goes through, and then also really what every survivor needs in order to navigate safely through that. So you, I think, already really shared a little bit about what it looked like when you reached out for help. So I want to kind of switch over, and you talked a lot about Edge and what they do for the community. So I wanted to switch over and ask Nicholas if he could share a little bit about what it is that Edge does for LGBTQ community.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. So before I begin, I just want to, thank Kelly for being brave and vulnerable and sharing her experience. I think that really meant a lot. And that just comes to show that domestic violence does not discriminate versus, a person's identity, right? Some statistics is like 43.8% of lesbians have experienced domestic violence, and around 26% of males who identify as being part of the gay community experience domestic violence. With that work, Edge does gear towards addressing those populations as well as all the other populations that we service in Morris Plains, New Jersey. One of the services that we have is behavioral health counseling. So all our counselors are very competent in working with individuals who have experience with domestic violence. And that goes beyond age, so you can be a youth or an adult. Other services that we do offer are LGBTQ plus support groups, which are now all running virtually. Others are case management, coordination, and housing services for youth and adults who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, as well as trainings and prevention and harm reduction programming. And we also have a wellness clinic that has primary care doctors and psychiatrists who also are competent in working with all communities.
Awesome. And so what are some of the ways that someone can connect to Edge services if a viewer is sitting here identifying with this message and these resources? How do they connect?
Yeah, so one great way is you can visit us on our website, which is www.edgenewjersey, which is nj.org. You can also reach out to us with our phones and through email. My personal email is n.lepper, Lepper, @edgenj.org.
Thanks so much for that, Nicholas. I'll be sure to drop those links for your email and for your website in our chat and in the comments below so that people can check those out and connect if need be. And so I know you mentioned kind of the prevalence of DV in the LGBT community for lesbian women and gay men. Do you see that that is for your specific population? You're seeing those numbers really hold true here in Morris County? Or do you find people are hesitant to share that experience? What have you guys seen over at Edge?
So with my personal experience in community engagement, I do see that domestic violence is very prevalent in our communities as well as like other communities that are out there. Unfortunately, it is a very taboo conversation to have. So a lot of people feel like it's something that they just can't come out with during intakes or when they first meet someone or newly being introduced. So part of something that we do in order to gain those statistics and to learn more about those areas about someone is we incorporate it as much as we can in our intake process. For instance, when we do our screeners, we have a series of questions that gauge, have you ever been a person receiving some negative language from someone, or have you ever experienced physical harm? And those are all questions that we ask to just raise awareness and to let them know that this is a safe space to have those conversations. And we do have these services that we are able to direct them in order to address it, such as our behavioral health clinicians.
Thank you. And what would you say some of the barriers are in the LGBTQ plus community for those survivors seeking those services?
Great question. I think one of the barriers is that people who are a part of the LGBTQ plus community, whether you're lesbian or gay or bisexual or however you identify, even part of the trans community, it's the access of services. There's not many places that you can come out to as being a gay male individual or a lesbian. So you really have to choose wisely and you have to scan and screen the room. In addition, is it okay for me to be gay? But on top of that, is it okay for me to come out as being someone who's experienced domestic violence on top of that?
Such an important point, Nicholas. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that JBWS provides services to all survivors of domestic violence, regardless of your gender identity or your sexual orientation, or even, a lot of people think if they haven't experienced physical abuse that they may not be eligible. All of those, anyone is welcome. If you've experienced any abuse at all, that's what JBWS is here for. And so I know certainly for someone in the LGBTQ community, that can be a scary thing to pick up a phone and, is just wondering if the person on the other end is going to make it about their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And that's not going to happen at JBWS because we really understand that it's this dynamic that's the issue and not who it's happening to. So thank you for that. It's really important that I think that everyone knows that no matter whether you connect at Edge or JBWS, certainly we will kind of connect each other, right? And look at the ways that our services can work together to provide whatever it is that a survivor needs along the way. So now I have a question for both of you, which is, what do you think is the most important thing that you would want an LGBTQ domestic violence survivor to know?
So I would say, as cliche as it sounds, is that you're not alone. The LGBTQ community has always been a resilient, marginalized group with the different intersectionalities that make someone who they are, and that it does get better. Another really cliche thing. I think what I really appreciate about being here today is being able to be vulnerable. And sometimes that's really hard, right? Especially for someone in the LGBTQ community who sees or feels that they're not being seen. And so just recognizing that there is people and organizations such as JBWS, such as Edge New Jersey, who are going to be that beacon of hope, that place to be brave and to be safe, and for you to be seen for who you are. And that includes your experience with domestic violence. And so that is just from a person to another person who might have experienced similar things, that there is hope. And every day that you choose to wake up and continue being resilient is a day that you are also able to see the light of hope. And I hope you all recognize that JBWS and Edge New Jersey is that beacon of hope.
That was really well said, Kelly. Thank you.
Mic drop. No, I'm kidding. And I just wanted to echo that I didn't conclude, as I shared about resources, since I am connected with Edge New Jersey, is the length of time it took me to actually seek services. I would say it took me about 4 minutes. I wish it took 4 minutes, 4 months of really going through my own process of accepting my journey in recovery and accepting my journey of truly needing help. And so in the field of mental health, which Nick and I are in, I like to practice what I preach. And I recognize that if I experienced a survivor of domestic violence for care at Edge, that it would not be practicing what I preach if I myself wouldn't go ahead and process that. So I took that as my challenge. I ripped the Band-Aid. I connected to therapy. I'm still in therapy, although I have process and I'm able to share my experience today very confidently. I'm in therapy because I realize that therapy is awesome. And so I encourage everyone to go into therapy because it really just is that security blanket of hope that we just talked about, of really just saying, hey, someone sees me for who I am, and I'm, as much as society likes to say that I'm not, I am seen and someone cares about me. And so I just offer that as, again, just a little bit of a perspective.
Thank you both. And Kelly, I think that definitely was a mic drop, right? You are not alone. And I think that perfectly echoes the services that both JBWS and Edge provide to our Morris County community. So the last question we had for you guys for our conversation today, from the perspective of a survivor, how can an ally or friend best be supportive if they are concerned someone they care about is experiencing domestic violence?
Well, Nick, would you like to share?
Well, I think if you have a level of concern that someone is going through something such as that experience of domestic violence, is just to kind of affirm what they say, and then maybe to provide some resources that they might be able to benefit from, such as other local services in their area, because they might be aware of it.
Yeah, and just to echo what Nick said, listen without judgment. People in marginalized groups are used to having to be defensive with protecting their identity, protecting their truth. And survivors of domestic violence are often fearful that their truth won't hold in their space. And so recognizing that their ability to share their story is resiliency in itself, and that if they choose to disclose that information to you, it is because they are ready to start that process. And so just being able to listen and create that brave space to take on that information in itself is being an ally.
Kelly and Nick, thank you both so much. I really consider it a privilege anytime I have the opportunity to hear from a survivor about their experience, and I always learn something new. I can't begin to thank you enough for being here. Kelly, I'm certain that your bravery today will help light the way for others that are navigating something similar, regardless of whether you're a member of the LGBTQ community. You know, that's the story of DV, and it's relatable, but there's help and there's hope. And so thank you both very much. And thank everyone for joining us today. Be on the lookout for another conversation next month. And in light of Kelly's comment about mental health, don't forget to check out May's conversation on mental health awareness. Everybody benefits from therapy. You're not wrong, Kelly. It is such an amazing thing, whether it's through GBWS or EDGE or private clinician or all three. It's really beneficial for everybody. So thank you all, and thanks for being here.